I think in some places you're going to have managers that just want you to perform and they just want you to get things done. They don't want to spend time teaching you. They don't want to spend time talking to you. They just think or have the expectation that you should do things and they should be fine. And in those places, you might be kind of fucked, actually, because if you have a manager that's not open, it's going to be very difficult.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Burnt Chef Journal, a hospitality-focused podcast dedicated to smashing the stigma of mental health and inspiring people to create change within their lives and organisations for a happier and healthier hospitality profession. This week we welcome back Joar Svensson from a previous episode. Joar is a sports performance psychologist and he's talking to us about more intricate details to do with sports performance psychology and what we can do in order to be able to create healthier and more sustainable working environments by focusing on our teams, their well-being and ultimately their performance as well. So there's a lot of tips in here, a really great chat that I've had with Joar, and it's full of ideas that you can adapt and use in your own lives and own working world. So I hope that you enjoy this week's episode, and without further ado, let's crack on.
How the devil are you, Joar? It's been 2 weeks.
Yeah, I'm awesome. How are you?
I'm good. I'm sat here, and we're not paid. This isn't an advertisement, but I'm sat here drinking a 0% Big Drop, a Citra IPA. I have ditched alcohol in the last 2 months, and I wouldn't say it's completely turned my life around, but it's nice not being so reliant upon it, really, and drinking 0% alternatives. There's a massive market out there. I never really knew it existed.
Yeah, I'm not a big drinker myself. I think I drink probably maybe twice a year or something. And today is one of those days. I have a cider here. I do it for podcasts just to smoothen out and be a bit more mellow. So it's kind of the opposite from you then.
No, it's it used to be my go-to for the same thing. Social situations, or perhaps things that I wasn't too comfortable with. I'd use alcohol as a way of, like, calming the nerves, letting my my inner extrovert come out. But then also I would flip and I would go too far. It wouldn't be 1 or 2. It would be, 3 o'clock in the morning finishes, and then my productivity would falter the next day. So I found that actually, it was a challenge to reduce my intake and to stop. But for now, it feels good. So I'll continue.
Yeah, and just like you say, it feels like it's a growing market. So there must be pretty good alternatives out there.
Yeah, amazing. Like, we partnered with Salcombe Gin for the new London Light. It's a 0% gin / aperitif. And they do this fantastic range. And usually when you think of 0% alternatives, you think, oh, God, they're going to taste just nasty. But there's so many options out there now that are actually comparable to percentage or to alcoholic beverages, that you find that you're missing them less and less nowadays. And it's definitely it's a growing market. And I think that COVID has brought about this sense of mindfulness, I guess, mindful drinking. People are more acutely aware of how they feel, which is, it's great. It can only be a good thing.
Yeah.
So what have you been up to since we last spoke? Because it's been a while, sir.
Yeah, I've gotten my first contract with a Michelin star restaurant. So we're going to start working together in February or March. So I'm super excited for that.
Amazing. And so what sort of things are you going to be doing? What are the challenges? What have they asked you to help with?
They're a local restaurant here in Sweden, and they have a huge emphasis on sustainability. So they already got a green star, and the head chef there, or the owner, thinks that it's important to think of sustainability in terms of the staff as well. So making sure that the staff has a good well-being, making sure they have good retention and stuff like that. So we're going to work on putting in the structures for motivation, so building a sustainable motivation climate so everybody's super motivated. We're going to also focus on performance, so helping them track performance, helping them identify and learn about the key performance factors. I have some models actually that I created a couple of months back about performance in restaurants. So performance for chefs, so chef as an individual, or I call it chef as an athlete, and then restaurant as a team. So we're going to go over those models, and then and then and then something else as well. It's going to be a lot of things. So I'm super excited.
That's amazing. It's so nice to hear that people are looking at sustainability, not necessarily from food sourcing and from plastic use, which are all important things, but actually looking after the greatest assets, which are the individuals that make up this amazing industry. So it sounds like you've got a lot of work ahead of you, but it must be pretty exciting, hey?
Yeah, it's super exciting. And when you said that, it got me thinking of something. I think it's super weird that you think about sustainability, like in terms of wastage of food, etc. But then you can have a retention rate of like 3 people out of 10, and that's okay. So it doesn't really make any sense. I mean, sustainability should be in the stuff. You can't have nice produce or local produce and then treat the stuff like shit and have like 7 out of 10 quit every year. That doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, and I think you're being generous, to be honest, Joar. I mean, the studies and the work that we've done recently has showed that in some businesses we're seeing turnover rates of 135, 140%. So that's not just 10 people that you're losing, that's an additional 3 or 4 people off the top of that. So,
which is mind-blowing. That's insane. I think the highest I've seen is also somewhere around 130% or 125% or something like that. But that's crazy.
It is. I mean, I don't know. And the industry survived like this for a long period of time. But, it's quite interesting over the last, certainly since we spoke now, we're starting to see this big change in how people are looking at the industry and what they need to do in order to make their businesses sustainable, but effective, but then also what they can do to keep their staff happy and engaged and, firing on all cylinders. There's a real big shift happening, and we're very pleased to see that.
Yeah, and like you talked about retention rate, I think you mentioned it the last podcast that the cost for rehiring is something around £3,000, but I've seen studies citing anywhere from £3,000 to £7,500 per person. So imagine that for like 125% turnover. That's crazy.
Yeah,
you're talking about almost $1 million.
It is
kroner. That is
kroner. Yeah, which in today's money, in today's pound conversion, I have no idea.
Yeah, £100,000, I think, something.
But then that's the cost that you can see in terms of what measurable costs per person.
Yeah.
What that doesn't take into account, and this is where one of our partners, Peopleful, come in really well, is that they're able to calculate through psychological studies the extenuating costs of high turnover rates as well, or intentions to leave. So, that's damage to brand reputation. That's the impact to the overall team in terms of losing that skill set or losing that individual, the time it takes to rehire and to retrain an individual, and the cost and the implications on top of that as well. So the costs are probably a lot higher, a double, if not 3 times the amount, because it's not just impacting that individual who's left, but it's impacting the wider organization for a more sustained period of time.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, for the team to be able to perform if you have 125% turnover rate, that's like a new person leaving each month and then rehiring. So like talking about cohesion and teamwork wise, having a new person that everybody needs to get to know, and he needs or she needs to get to know their place in the kitchen and the routines. And then when she or he has done that, then a new person come in and they have to learn, and everybody has to get used to a new person all the time. So I can't imagine how you can perform with all of that going on.
It's as I say, I'm very, very positive about the future of hospitality. I know that it's been a tough. COVID's been tough for many individuals and many businesses out there, and we're still not through it. In terms of retention and in terms of hiring people at the moment, we are thin on the ground. However, I think we're starting to see a change, the likes of one we haven't seen in such a monumental style for years. I mean, certainly I think since the Escoffier systems came in place. So it's a very, very exciting time. And I guess I'm quite intrigued. I mean, it has been a long while since we spoke. So you must have been sort of sitting back and looking at what's going on and been doing your sort of own studies and work on the side. And what sort of things have you learned over that period of time?
Yeah, I've done a bit of researching, and I'm actually doing a study at the moment on well-being in the restaurant industry. So trying to look at different variables like well-being, and then also exercise, sleep, alcohol, and drug abuse or use, whichever way you want to phrase it, to see the variables and how they interact, and get a good look on well-being. Because when I searched for well-being in the restaurant industry, there weren't really any good studies to be found. I couldn't find a single one, I think, that focused on well-being, which is super weird. If you've listened to this podcast, you know how big an issue well-being and mental health is. So I think that's a study that needs to come out, and I'm currently searching for participants. It's just an online questionnaire. You have to be above the age of 18 and have worked in the restaurant industry for 1 year. So if you want to say your part, then maybe do your part for the industry and make sure the picture gets shared so everybody understand how the industry looks. I think maybe we can put a link on this podcast or something so they can join. So I think it's very interesting. I've got a couple of answers already, and there is a lot of hostile work environment related answers. Not anything super severe yet, but I think we have a couple that classifies as bullying, or to the definition of the questionnaire at least. So
interesting. How many respondents have you had for it so far, and how many do you need?
Oof. Yeah. How many I need is a difficult question. I'm aiming for about 100, and I want to have a good split between different types of restaurants. So I have 4 categories, I think: casual dining, fine dining, restaurant aiming for Michelin star, and Michelin star restaurant. So it would be good to have a good split between them, because I theorize or hypothesize that it differs between the levels. I think there's a lot more pressure in Michelin restaurants and restaurant aiming for the Michelin level, because perfection is so important, and you can't get away with as much as you can in casual dining. Not to say that casual dining is easy by any means, but I think that Michelin star restaurant has even more pressure. And I know there's been a couple of incidences of suicide in the Michelin world, like Benoit Valère, who committed suicide when he lost his Rosette Stones, and there were rumors about him losing a Michelin star as well. So that's my theory. I would like at least 100 would be a decent number, and I got about 7 now, with a pretty good split so far, actually. So, but the Michelin star people are kind of hard to reach out, but I'm doing my best to find them.
Yeah, I mean, we can help certainly share that. I think the larger the data set, the more accurate the figures can be. It's interesting what you're saying about stress and impacts to well-being as a result of obtaining something like a Michelin compared to going for one. I think from a psychological point of view, when you're trying to obtain a Michelin star, there is a sense of cohesion, a sense of a goal, a shared unity that you can be working towards. And yes, it can be incredibly stressful and frustrating and high pressured and highly emotional, but there's this drive, there's this thing that you're working towards. Whereas once you've achieved it, the control moves away from you trying to get it with your team to now it's almost in control of you. You have to retain it, and you have to continue at those standards, and it sort of strips you of your power. So it must be, it'd be quite interesting to see what the results of that survey would be.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, it's so important getting a good figure and a good study out there with well-being, like in a good, proper academic journal, so we can have something solid, peer-reviewed to point towards.
Yeah,
I think, at least for the academic world, because when you do studies, you need some groundwork for for the field and be able to point that this is an issue, and that doesn't exist at the moment. And I'm not sure how lawmakers in country work and policymakers, but I'm not sure if like independent questionnaires or independent figures is enough. But if you have a study in a peer-reviewed journal, maybe that says more. So I think it could be beneficial towards policymakers and stuff like that as well. So very important.
Yeah, and we're in the process of signing off a partnership with the National Health and Safety Executive over here in the UK to be able to start looking at how we reduce stress within the workplace and how we can promote their the great work they've always had in place, but not many people are aware of. For example, in the UK, it's a legal requirement to have a stress audit and to put in a stress risk assessment and a policy. I don't think I've met one business in 3 years that has a stress audit. And that's not just within hospitality, that's in general. But hospitality is very, it's a highly stressed environment, which is one of the reasons why mental illnesses are so present and high turnover. So it'll be very exciting to start getting some data from that. But just going back to what you were saying is I've got 2 reports here that I can send to you. They're both from the International Journal of Hospitality Management, and these are clinical reports. One of them's the examination of social support and the relationships to chefs' burnout. The other one is about the silent threat presenteeism in the hospitality industry and examining exactly what the physical and mental factors of those are. And these are incredibly insightful, and they may help you along your journey. And to anyone else that wants to read them as well, we can send you a copy if you email us. But
yeah, please do. I've read some articles from that journal, so I might have already read them, but please send them. It could be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. It's obviously very, very clinical in terms of how they're looking at it, and there's a lot of stuff in there that may be difficult to digest, but looking at things like self-esteem and turnover rates and burnout and how they're quite heavily correlated. And burnout's still a very unknown phenomenon within the working world.
Yeah.
I don't know, have you ever experienced burnout from a sports psychology point of view?
Like, not with any of my clients, but I have people in my close vicinity that has burnout. So I've experienced it in that capacity.
Really? What sort of sectors were they working in?
Sectors.
What industries?
What do you say? Like, I know one would be management, and then it was one of my, or I think actually 2 of my teachers. No, 3. Yeah. So 3 in schooling and 1 in management.
How interesting.
Yeah. So it's, for those who don't know, burnout is crazy because unlike physical illnesses or injuries, you can't really see burnout at a person. It's hard to just, she obviously has burnout or he obviously has burnout. And there's a lot of stigma attached to it because you have to prove it. And there's a lot of people who's going to second guess you and like, no, you're just being a wimp and you should just power through it. But yeah, burnout is crazy. You lose all your energy, you're tired all day, and your brain seems to be kind of foggy, like you can't keep track of things, and it's hard to keep track of things, and you kind of lose yourself. So it's
depersonalization. I'm not ashamed to admit, because that's the whole purpose of the Burnt Chef project and what I'm here to do. But at the back end of last year, 2021, I experienced burnout myself, which was kind of ironic, bearing in mind I was traveling around the country teaching people about the effects and the impacts of burnout and saying, you're not superhuman. You do have a limit, and it's important to look after yourself. And here I was, not taking my own advice, and that culminated in me, breakdown of relationships, both personal and professional, severe physical health issues, in terms of like ongoing chest infection for a long time, poor performance, and the final Achilles heel for me was excessive drinking on a Monday to an event, and then driving 6 hours down to another event on a Tuesday, and getting outside the front door just feeling completely and emotionally blunted. I didn't know what my purpose was anymore, and getting into this award ceremony, I was literally at the front door of this award ceremony, and I couldn't couldn't go in. I had nothing more to give. I turned around and drove 4 hours to my home and just hunkered down for a week and switched off. But one of the most ironic things, I guess, and the cruel jokes of something like burnout is the denial phase, whereby you're laser focused on perhaps, well, it's usually your work, and you're not the one that's experiencing difficulty. You can keep going. You can do another 70-hour week. You can do, longer days, work faster, work harder, first one in, last one out. But eventually it becomes a breaking point, and it's physical and mental exhaustion.
Yeah, and I think speaking of, I think with burnout, there's a lot of people that will kind of diminish or not really think about the consequences. Like, okay, I can work 2 hours more or 3 hours more, but that time isn't free. I mean, what are you sacrificing in order to do those 3 hours? You might be sacrificing your health, your mental well-being, relationship with family, friends, peers, wife, girlfriend, etc., etc. So I think it's important to think that most things are not free, and just working 3 hours more one day might be fine, but then if you do it each week, and then maybe 2 times a week, 3 times a week, and there's going to be a lot of sacrifices along the way which aren't necessarily positive. And then also you have to think about the productivity. Like, okay, if you put 2 hours more, does it really has to be done today? Will you be that productive, or will you be more productive if you take a good night's sleep and then come back to it? Because it's not like you can keep going at the same productivity level for 12, 13 hours straight. That's not going to happen. And I think anybody who says that and says they're able to do it sustainably are just kidding themselves.
I think that's it's an important thing. When you look at us as human beings and you strip all the social expectancy and all the flashy things and work and all of that other stuff away, travel back in time to when we were on the plains of Africa as cavemen. We weren't designed to operate at high levels of stress for 24, 48 hours, perhaps even months at a time. It wasn't sustainable. If we had to run away or attack something that was attacking us, we couldn't do it for any longer than a couple of hours at a time, because our bodies aren't built to do that. Yet we're so far away from our biology and our physiology nowadays that we almost trick ourselves into thinking that we are superhuman, that we are these evolved creatures that can be in stressful situations time and time again without having any of the safety measures in place, such as exercise and time with family and time to regulate and work through the high levels of stress. But we're not. We are just animals, and we need to understand that the better that we can build in these protection mechanisms and look after ourselves and get rid of the stress and give ourselves time off, the better everything is going to be in terms of productivity and relationships. And sometimes when you just break it back down to basics again, it's amazing that you can try and kind of put things into a bit of a different perspective, can't you?
Yeah, and it's important to note that stress isn't necessarily negative. A little stress is positive, but it is when you have stress or high stress over prolonged periods that it is negative. Just like you said, like a couple of hours is fine, but then you have to have that rest period where your body deloads. You can't be on the sympathetic nervous system going haywire all day. You have to switch to the parasympathetic nervous system, it's called, for the body to find homeostasis. I mean, autonomy isn't really my strong point, but I know about the nervous system at least, and the impacts of stress are huge. I mean, it's so many factors that are impacted. You have mood, you have shape, you have well-being, and then the work climate is probably going to impact it. And a lot of people have maladaptive coping strategies, like in your case, alcohol. Some people, maybe as a way of coping with the loss of productivity, work even more. So you become, let's say you were at 100% and you work 10 hours, and then you're at the 80% because you're tired. So you only get 8 hours effective work. So you try to work 2 hours more, or whatever that turns out to be. And then you become even less, so 60%. So it's only 6 hours effective. And then you have to work 4 hours more, assuming that those are 100% effective, and then so on and so on. So it's easy to see how it becomes a vicious cycle. And I mean, if you only care about your performance and only care about success, it's not going to be positive anyway, because you're not going to be productive. And if you get burnout or chronic fatigue syndrome or something like that, you could be out for years. I mean, chronic fatigue syndrome is super severe, and it can take a long time to recover. So trying to put things in terms of the long run, like thinking month to month and maybe half year, or year to year. If you don't think that you're going to be able to keep up this pace for like a couple of months, then what is the point, or a year? Because like what matters isn't how much money you make in a week or what you do in a week. It should be year to year. Otherwise, like, what is a week in a year? It's nothing.
Yeah, it's about a sustainable structure in the same way that, you could probably work with only 3 hours sleep a night for a week at a time, but eventually, you can survive longer without food than you can without sleep. It's a biological fact. And so if you haven't got mechanisms in place that give you that time off and allow you to rest, or, I've taken up swimming recently as well. So
nice.
For me, it's a great mindfulness thing. It's fantastic for my cardio system. And I'm not coming at you here like Michael Phelps. Michael Phelps? And
Michael Phelps.
Michael Phelps. I tell you what, I started this in October, and I thought I'm going to take up swimming lessons because I felt I was a confident swimmer. My mum used to be a professional swimmer. But it turns out that trying to do front crawl when you haven't ever really been taught properly how to do front crawl since you were a kid is very difficult. You can't breathe underwater for a start. I mean, who knew? Secondly, your technique's all wrong. You're trying to swim through the water like a lead weight. And so I joined the swimming class, and the warm-up was 4 lengths of a 25-meter pool. 2 lengths in, I had to sit on the side and rest for 15 minutes because I was my heart rate was at 180 beats per minute. I was hyperventilating. I couldn't join in with the class. But it's such a progressive thing. If you stick with it, I'm 3 months in now. I did 2.5K the other night in 50 minutes. And again, I'm not proficient at all, but I've managed to concentrate on one thing each time. So my breathing, it helps regulate my breathing, which then brings my heart rate down, because you have to have a low heart rate to be able to swim effectively for long periods of time. Yeah. And for me, it's been an absolutely great way of being able to bust that stress and to be able to something that's both physiologically and mentally good for you. But it's not easy. It's definitely a challenge, but the benefits are brilliant.
But and it's kind of a good analogy for the stress, like we talked about. If you go ape shit for 25 or 50 meters, you might be first at those 50 meters. But then if you have to rest for 50 minutes, you're not going to be first at the 100 meters. So being able, like you do, and take things one day at a time and lesson by lesson and slowly increasing, and now you can do 2.5K. But if you were to go crazy all the time, you would probably not have made this much progress. So a good analogy.
Yeah, I have to be honest. For me, I always was trying to, I guess it's my personality. When I was in the water, I wanted to be the first one. I wanted to be the fastest. And all these older ladies and gentlemen would look at me and go, "Oh, you're really fast. You can go ahead." But then they were lapping me, whereas I was resting on the side of the pool for 15 minutes. And so whilst I've tried to slow down in terms of my swimming performance, tried to slow down my tempo, I found that was very difficult. And so I've actually developed a better breathing system, more efficiency in the water to reduce the impact on my body. And as a result, that has allowed me to keep a certain level of speed up, but then it's grown my cardio system. So I think what I'm trying to say is that there are ways of working it, but it has to be sustainable. I'm not going to be able to swim for 2 hours straight like someone who's going at half the pace. And it's about knowing those limits and working on each of those areas and tweaking them, isn't it, really?
Yeah, but to bring it back to the restaurant industry, I think there's something almost romanticized about being a martyr, like working 16 hours a day or maybe more, and then maybe practicing at home and not sleeping any, and going out drinking and then just bagging on each day. But like being a martyr isn't going to help your performance. It's probably going to make it worse. And I'm wondering if you're one of those guys, not you, but if you listening are one of those people who crack on for 16 hours and you think you're tough, etc., etc. Are you doing the other things that are important for your performance as well? Are you eating good? Are you taking care of your nutrition? Are you exercising regularly? Are you focusing on your sleeping and getting those 8 hours in? Because if you're just doing your best in the kitchen and working as hard as you can, but neglecting sleep, neglecting nutrition, you're kind of walking over $100 bills to pick up pennies. It's kind of doesn't make sense. Like, it's cool to be tough and everything, but being a martyr isn't good for your performance. So if you care about performance and being the best, you're not doing yourself any favors.
It's interesting you should say that. So we were talking before about emotional regulation. And for me, one of the things that was the most tiring when I was experiencing a mental illness, earlier on in life, was not just my emotional regulation, but my personality regulation as well. And feeling something and then having to second guess it and to change and to modify my behavior and my approach. That sort of self-regulation takes a lot of additional energy. And if that you're putting that on top of long hours, poor nutrition, poor personal relationships, poor physical health, there's just another thing that's the way I think about it. It's like, like Tekken, like those old games consoles, perhaps, where you've got this health bar on the side, and every single time, you're doing something like that, it's almost taking a certain amount of points off of you, isn't it? Rather than boosting it back up again.
Yeah, that's right. I think of it in terms of the model that I talked about before, the chef performance model, and it's might be hard for you listeners to visualize this, but imagine a circle, and then you have 3 tiers. So you have an inner circle, and then a second tier circle around that circle, and then a third tier around that circle. So the first tier are factors that impact your performance directly, and those factors are mood, motivation, your current shape, like the shape of the day, and your skills. So if you have a bad mood, you're not going to perform well, probably. I mean, you can still perform well, but you're probably not going to. If you're not motivated or excited about work, you're not going to try as hard as you can, which will directly impact performance. If you're super tired, maybe sick, like we talked about with the absenteeism, but still going to work, you won't be able to focus as good as you can. You don't have the capacity, so that's not going to happen.
Present.
And if you suck at cooking, you're also not going to cook well, which makes sense. But then you have second tier, which doesn't impact performance directly, but it impacts the first tier. And there you have well-being, work climate, nutrition, fitness, and sleep. So if you have bad well-being, like we talked about with burnout, your mood is probably going to be worse. Your shape is going to be pretty shit. If the work climate is bad and you have a climate where you don't have good motivation, like we talked about last podcast with the basic psychological needs, you don't get a sense of competence, the boss is up your ass all day, and you have no autonomy, and you don't feel at home or have low relatedness there, your motivation is going to be bad and performance is going to be bad. And nutrition, fitness, and sleep, I mean, if you're not getting good nutrition and your energy is going to be bad, then your focus is going to be bad, then you can't perform. And then if your sleep is bad, your focus is going to be bad, your mood and day shape probably going to be bad, then the performance is going to be bad. And thirdly and lastly, life balance. I mean, if you have bad life balance, like a bad structure of your life, you have a hard time finding the balance between work and sleep and social relationships, then your well-being is going to be bad, and probably nutrition, fitness, and sleep as well, because you're not going to have the time to sleep, not going to have the time for good nutrition or fitness. At least you're not going to feel like you have it that way. And then that's going to impact the first tier and then performance. There's a lot of factors to to have in your head, but I think that makes a good visualization about how many factors it is that impacts performance, not necessarily directly, but indirectly. So, yeah.
It's interesting. I've just today finished a feedback session with an emotional resilience coach.
Yeah.
One of the things that was brought up was a sense of connection, a sense of belonging, and your network around you. And if that's rating quite low, that actually negatively impacts your overall well-being, and it can also, as you say, impact your performance as well. So if you're not fostering those connections and you're letting them just go by the wayside because work and doing all the hours that God sent is the way that you feel is productive, then actually you're damaging your performance long term by not focusing on the important aspects of well-being. And connection is so underrated, but so valuable in terms of good health.
And in terms of stress, I mean, stress has been defined, at least by some authors, as the dynamic balance between resources and challenges or barriers. And like social relationships with your peers, parents, girlfriend, fiance, wife, is a major resource for many people. So if you're not having those relationships, you're taking away one of the greatest resources you might have. I mean, I know my wife has helped me a lot with things like just supporting me and doing tasks so I don't have to do them, so I can focus on work. Of course, I try to pay her back as good as I can, but it's such a huge help because it takes things off my mind that otherwise I would have to do. Then I would be less productive and I would be tired, so I couldn't perform as well. So, yeah, social relationships are super key, I would say, for a lot of people.
And a big shout out as well, because one thing that goes most unnoticed when we're having these conversations is the people behind the scenes, the wives, the husbands, the family members, the friends, the children, who often enough are there supporting us, the hospitality professionals, to do the things that we love or that we're paid to do. And those people don't often get public thanks and public recognition for that. And I think that is so important. And we'd love to do more in terms of, speaking to these people. Speaking, if you are a wife or a husband of a chef or a general manager or, a barista or a bar person that you don't see, then do get in touch, because hospitality is it's not just a career choice, it's a lifestyle, it's a passion, it's everything that's fantastic about this great industry. But often enough, it's not just the individual who's in it that's experiencing it, it's the people around the outside and the support network. And more needs to be done to shine a spotlight on those people.
Yeah, which is important to highlight as well, because we talked before about sacrifices, and I mean, a lot of people have little issues doing maybe 3 hours extra or doing things that harms themselves, or like going through rough times just to get ahead. But are you willing to put your wife or your parents or your maybe siblings in that same situation? Are you willing to make life worse for them as well, just for you to succeed? I think that's a point that a lot of people don't really think about. I mean, if I were to go out and maybe hold a lot of workshops around the country or internationally and have to leave my wife at home, that wouldn't just impact me, that would impact her a lot as well, and our relationship. And I'm not willing to put our relationship under that much stress. I know that's not going to be good for either of us in the long term, and I don't feel it would be right for her as well. So I think when you are in those kinds of contexts, it's very important to think about your peers and your relationships as well.
Yeah, 100%. It's it's an important thing, and perhaps something that we'll focus on more over time. Yeah, and even an appreciation day, I think, is a must. So if anyone's interested in getting on board with that, let us know. We'll put some details out soon. We will look at that. I think that's so important. So important.
Yeah, and with relationships, I think it's a tricky issue, because if you don't put enough time towards relationships, they're probably going to be bad. And instead of being a resource, that can be a major stressor instead. Like, imagine having a relationship when you're a chef and you work 16 hours a day, and maybe instead of going home and spending that last hour or 2 hours with your wife, or waking up a bit earlier to spend that time, maybe you stay out drinking instead, then your relationship is going to take damage. And over the course of maybe weeks, months, your relationship is going to get worse and worse. then battles and fights are going to arise. So when you get home, you're even more stressed because you know you're going to have a fight, your sleep is going to suffer, and you maybe going to have anxiety and worry about that all day, and then your focus is going to shit, your mood is going to shit, your sleep is going to shit, so your focus and everything else is going to shit. So I think that's a major maybe untapped performance vector that people have, like tending to their relationship, making sure that they're not a stressor, but they're a major resource instead.
That's, yeah, an amazing. What's the analogy? You can't bang a square peg into a round hole. It fits a lot smoother if it's the same shape and size. And so, just making life as smooth as possible is, by focusing on yourself first and foremost and your family, is almost a key, isn't it? But I'm keen to sort of explore more about your thoughts, Joar, because I know that we've been in contact regularly since the last podcast, and you've been sort of looking at this a lot from different perspectives. And I wanted to know if there was anything other that you'd seen or sort of had thought about since we last spoke that you wanted to share with our listeners.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things, like the chef performance model that I just shared, I think is a big one, but then also the restaurant as team model that I would like to share, if that's okay. So we have the same tier system, like the circle with the first tier, the second tier, and the third tier. So at the first tier, we have teamwork, communication, equipment, and skills. So if your teamwork is bad, if your team is not working together, they're having a hard time doing things together, one person can't cook one thing in together with another person, they fight, etc., then it's not going to be a good dish. If the communication is bad, your food is not going to be ready at the same time, and it could also impact self-confidence. Like if someone is not really competent, supportive, it could impact motivation as well. So performance is going to go down. If the equipment is bad in the kitchen, obviously the performance is not going to be key. And if the chefs aren't skilled, the performance isn't going to be well as well. So second tier, we have bullying, rivalry, relatedness, learning and teaching. So if we have bullying, and I think this is a tricky point because I know there is a lot of banter in the kitchen and there is a rough environment, and there doesn't have to be anything wrong about that, but it certainly can be. So maybe taking a step back and thinking about it, because if someone feels bullied, their communication and teamwork is probably going to suffer. Their motivation is as well, like we talked in the chef performance model, so they're not going to perform that well. If we have a lot of rivalry, which I've experienced recently talking with a couple of chefs, with the hierarchy, you only have certain places for like sous chefs or chef de partie. So there could be a lot of rivalry between the commis and junior sous chefs and junior chef de parties. I spoke with the one chef through this podcast actually that got in contact, and he told me at one kitchen they worked at, there was a huge issue with people stealing each other's stuff. So staff taking each other's knives and pans, etc., etc. And I mean, that's crazy in a performance setting. That's like in football, if one teammate were to just run over and take the ball from another, that doesn't make sense. So if we have a lot of rivalry, performance is going to suffer, probably. Relatedness, we just talked about the importance of that, but also learning and teaching, like what structures do we have to make sure that the new chefs and the new staff are coming in and learning as quick as they can, not just so they're learning the dishes and how the team works, but also learning past that and evolving and making them better chefs so they can take the place of going from commis to junior sous chef or junior chef de partie to sous chef. So making sure we're creating better players and better chefs, not just like making them okay. And then third tier, we have turnover, banter, and opportunities. So turnover, like we talked about, if we have a lot of turnover, you're going to require super good learning and teaching. Because if we have super high turnover and the learning and teaching isn't well, then it's going to take a lot of time for people to get into the structures and learn. And that's time that we're not performing, that we're just focusing on getting by, which is super negative. We also have banter. I think banter is good. I know I have a lot of banter with my friends and it's fun, but it can easily get out of hand, I would say. And that could lead to bullying, which, impacts performance negatively. And then we also have opportunities, which is quite interesting, because if a place has few opportunities, meaning opportunities to excel, to make yourself feel like a valued team player, or to get new roles where you feel important, then the rivalry is probably going to be higher. I mean, if you only get promotion once a year, if there's only like 2 or 3 promotions once a year for the entire staff, the rivalry is going to be super high to get that promotion because everybody wants it. But if everybody, like, you can't have 12 sous chefs and then like 3 commis, that doesn't make sense. But if you have roles where people feel valued, so they're not just a commis, they're a commis, but they're also in charge of, like, they're the potato commis who has like an expert on potatoes. That's a maybe sounds like a ridiculous example, but if you give them roles like that where they feel like valued, like, I'm not just a commis, I'm an important part of the team, and I make my presence known and it impacts performance and I'm important for the team, then I think rivalry is going to be lower. And if we have opportunities like that, that's not going to have a direct effect of performance, but it's going to have like a third tier effect on performance. And just thinking about these two models and sustainability, I mean, maybe in the long term, or in the short term, if you have a lot of rivalry, that's fine. But what's going to happen when people steal each other's knives and stuff like that in a year? People are going to leave. Then we have a lot of turnover. And all of these factors affect a lot of factors. So sustainability-wise, I think it's key to have these kinds of models where you're not only thinking about performance and you have to be able to do this today and you're performing bad today, but what structures do we have to make sure that performance isn't, or like excellence isn't just something that happens, like to make excellence something that's inevitable instead of something random.
I think I love all of that. I mean, as a 3-tiered system that all directly impact each other and overall impact the performance of yourself and your team, I think it's very important. And one thing that's flashing out at me with that is psychological safety. For a lot of the things that you're discussing there in terms of growth, in terms of banter or bullying or feedback, understanding where your position is, what your value is within the business, how you fit into that organization, is psychological safety, which over in the UK isn't spoken about enough. Over in America and Canada, more so. But it's about having that freedom to be able to express your views and being able to gain feedback in a safe manner without feeling that you are at risk, or without feeling that you are going to negatively impact others. And it's not about shooting your mouth off and telling everyone that they're shit at their jobs and they shouldn't do it, almost like a Ramsey-esque sort of style that you'd see on TV. Yeah. But it's about, and I talk about reviews. So one of the businesses that we consult with, I bang on about reviews a lot, and performance reviews. And everyone says, performance reviews, they're such a negative thing. I only get a performance review when I've done something wrong, or if I've got a disciplinary, and I'm like, you guys are missing the point. A performance review isn't a stick to beat someone with. In the same way, it's not a carrot to dangle in front of someone. It's an opportunity for a leader and an individual to sit down in comfortable surroundings and to be able to have open and honest conversations, and for the employee to find where they fit within the organization, to establish what their roadmap is in terms of development, how they're doing, and to have an opportunity to say what they want from the job. And for employers, it's an opportunity to learn more about that individual and to find out exactly what it is that they want, what makes them tick, and also to get some feedback as well about your management style and things that you can do better, because sometimes the best feedback is the mirror, and it's about what the mirror is telling you. And the mirror is, in this case, the people that you're dealing with. And they've put this in place, and even within a week, performance for certain individuals who are looking to leave has improved massively, and they've stayed with the business because just having that conversation has improved their well-being, their understanding of where they fit within their organization. It's make them feel valued. Anyone out there that's listening, performance reviews, and we'll be loading up free modules on the Burn Chef Academy in terms of coaching and mentoring and how to do these, but they are so instrumental in terms of especially this conversation, which is maximizing performance of individuals based on well-being.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, performance reviews are so key. Like trying to dismiss them or having them once a year or maybe twice a year is crazy to me, especially in restaurant industry. I mean, in sports, let's say in football, you play each game. Maybe you play a game a week, maybe twice a week. So you get direct feedback on your performance. Like, did you score any goals, or did you perform well on the field? And it's pretty concrete. I mean, depending on the position, and they're pretty good with stats in those games as well, like ball control and how much you blocked and how much you passed, etc., etc. But in the kitchen industry, or in the restaurant industry, you don't have that many concrete variables. So performance reviews are even more key. Like how is a chef supposed to know how they're performing? Like, are they going to wait a half a year to know that their performance has been going down that year or has been going up? That's crazy to me. Of course, you get instant comments from your head chef or maybe a sous chef or chef de partie about how you're doing and you're cooking something wrong, but having sort of a more long-term perspective, so not just what are you doing this day, but how have you been performing this month, and trying to get that feedback. I mean, it's super key. It's like, maybe you talked about games before with the health bar, but maybe if you imagine a game where you have no health bar and no experience meter and you have no maps and you're just walking around and doing random things and you have no way to gauge how you're progressing in the game, it's just like the same. How are you? That would be crazy. So why would you have that in the restaurant industry? I would probably advise, depending on the context and the structure, of course, how much time there is and what resources we have to work with. But once a month would be like bare minimum. And it doesn't have to be an hour for each person, but just like we have to have some metrics to know how people are performing, so they know if they're doing well, if they're not doing well, and what they're supposed to improve. I mean, we can't wait a half a year for that. That's crazy. And even a year, that's insane performance-wise.
Yeah. And it happens. A lot of people will have a yearly appraisal, an opportunity
that is crazy,
where they know where how they've performed roughly for the year and whether or not they're in for any particular pay rises. But that person for that entire year doesn't know where they are, who they are, where they fit, what people think of their work, what they, and hasn't been given an opportunity to say what they think of decisions that have been made and directions that companies have gone. And this is not to be underestimated. This is a free tip that we are giving to everyone that will change your business.
I think one way that people are going to think about this is maybe people in a manager position or like a head chef or someone in staff is going to think that, okay, but I give my chefs direction every day. I give them comments, I give them feedback. But first you have to think about, are you as good as giving positive feedback as you are with like correctional feedback? Are you telling someone you cooked that dish great as many times as you say you cooked that dish shit, or you need to improve this, or that was wrong? I think especially in a Michelin context, you're probably focusing a lot more on what is wrong because everything needs to be perfect. And when it's perfect, that's like standard. That's how it's supposed to be. And then you have to secondly think about the bias of people. Like, what are you remembering? You're remembering the big moments and the moments that impact you the most. So maybe a random comment like, that's okay, or you're not saying anything because everything is fine. That's probably not going to leave a big impact, but you berating a chef for 15 minutes or saying something like super bad, you're super shit, then you should just leave. Do you want to leave work? Do you want to work here even? And having those kinds of like arguments that could stick with the chef for a week, a month, and if that happens once a week, he's going to be maybe biased to think about only the negative stuff. And even if there were 3, 4, 5 positive stuff, if there's 20 negative stuffs, he's probably or she's probably going to be more inclined to think about the negative. So I think it's important to have those situations where you sit down maybe 20 minutes or everybody gets a report like, okay, I know that it's been rough in the kitchen, but I've seen good progress from you. Last time you couldn't do this right, you couldn't do this right, but now you can. I feel like I'm able to leave you alone a lot more. You take more responsibility. You're doing this good, this good. You still need to focus a bit on the details because you can be a bit sloppy at times, especially when there's high pressure, but otherwise you're doing great. So just try to focus on that, and then like that feedback is key. How is a chef in the moment, especially an inexperienced chef in the moment, supposed to think about take a meta perspective to think about the long-term things about what they're improving?
Yeah. There's an element of empathy involved with this because, and I'm not lecturing because I am terrible at empathy. It's definitely a skill that you have to learn and practice, but it's understanding that your words can have a profound impact on someone and how they feel, not just in that moment, but long term. And to put this into a context that everyone on this podcast will understand is we all know what it's like to have a review on your food, on your service, on your drink, on your ambience, on your furniture that's within the business or whatever it might be. And to be either named or to know that you've had a part in that. And that review is a 1 star. We know how that feels and how demoralizing and how that 1 star, that one poor review will outweigh every other review that you've had for the last week, and it will weigh on you. But we also know what it's like to have that glowing recommendation where Mr. or Mrs. customer asked specifically to come and thank you and shakes your hand for that experience or for that dish. And just think about how that feels inside you, and that warmth and that feeling of accomplishment and confidence, and that resilience that all of a sudden you can take on the world. Now, I'm not saying that every single review has to be "you're great, you're amazing, you've got nothing to improve on," because that can also damage things. People, if they don't feel like they have anything to strive for or to achieve, that can also be quite stressful. It can be demoralizing for certain people, like myself as well. So it's about balancing it and then making it a neutral. So leaving with starting with a great praise and then giving something as a work on factor, or even better than that, allowing that individual, whether that's you yourself in a review with your manager, or your manager, you're listening to this and you want to know how to do a review, is letting that person decide for themselves what they should be focusing on as the next skill. Having guidance and knowing and some emotional intelligence to know that you have your own ideas of what they should be improving on or what you should be improving on. But ultimately, that level of control and say in your work, again, is a huge, huge factor to not just overall performance, but long-term retention, great or better health in a high-stress environment.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to communication. And like you talked about feeling safe, the way I see performance reviews is in the context of, if I'm the manager, if I'm the one who's giving the review, I'm going at it as, hi, you're a part of the team, you're a valued member here, and I want to do the best I can to make you the best that you're able to be. And this is not a way to say that you suck or that you're the best. I'm strictly here to make you as good as you can. And you're totally safe here. You're going to have shit weeks, you're going to have good weeks, but over the course of this period, like a year, we're going to make those shit weeks get better and better, and the peaks get even higher. So we're going to to make sure that your performance keeps on rising. So what can I do to help you get better? And like you talked about, the sense of autonomy, like if someone's struggling with one thing, like maybe they're super bad at pressure performance, they can't perform when they're stressed, so, and that takes, like, the consequence of that is that they constantly overcook a specific dish. Then they don't need training in how to do the dish. They know how to do the dish. They need training in how to handle pressure situations and maybe some keywords and some strategies. So if you, like a manager, aren't aware of that and don't ask the chef, you're just going to focus on the wrong thing. So I think it's very important to have that communication, because, well, it's true that they might be inexperienced and they have no idea about what they should improve, but they could have some key insights that are super important. So why not, like, ask them about how they think things are going and get their side of it? I think that's super useful information. I mean, why wouldn't you?
So just out of curiosity, Joel, then say, for example, we have someone who's listening to this right now who they feel like they identify with this, that perhaps they are inexperienced or they've got areas that they're struggling with. How would they raise this with someone who hasn't heard this podcast in terms of being able to get this addressed with their leader? Because, we know that there's a bit of a skill gap shortage and not everyone has formal training with coaching or with leadership. So how does someone going about raising this with their leader or, or their manager?
Yeah, this can be super hard and it can also be very easy. I think in some places you're going to have managers that just want you to perform and they just want you to get things done. They don't want to spend time teaching you. They don't want to spend time talking to you. They just think or have the expectation that you should do things and they should be fine. And in those places you might be kind of fucked, actually, because if you have a manager that's not open, it's going to be very difficult. I would advise you to try. And I would also say that if you feel like you're not in an environment where you are learning and growing as a chef, you're probably at the wrong place. I mean, even if it's a 3-star restaurant, if you're feeling that you're not learning, you're not giving opportunities to perform and evolve, it doesn't really matter if it's a 3-star restaurant. If you're not improving, you're not improving. And at the places where the chefs and the managers are more open, I would try to take a humble approach and say, hi, I love it here, or you don't have to say you love it here, but hi, I like it here and I think it's really great working here, but there are some points where I'm kind of lost and you are a great chef and I could really need some assistance on this because I find this difficult, and I know if I were to just get the key points that I would get it right, and then you can just get it off your way. So would you mind teaching me? And I think it would be awesome to have a structure where I can ask one of my peers or one that just one step above. So if I'm the junior chef party, I can ask the chef party, can you just show me these things? And maybe I think that maybe having a training day, like once a week, if that's possible, or a couple of hours where the staff gather around and like inexperienced or junior chefs get to ask questions to more experienced chefs, like how to do certain things and like how to make this easier. So they're not just in it for themselves. They don't just have their own way that they've made up themselves to maybe peel an onion or whatever. They take the advice from experienced chef who's probably gone through the entire process and have a lot of hacks. So to do that, so taking a kind of humble opinion and being honest and trying to, I think it's always good to try to put things in the perspective of this is also going to help you. If I'm better, we are better as a team. If I'm a weak link, then the team is bad. Obviously, you can't talk shit about yourself too much because then they will just fire you probably. But trying to have that approach, like if I think I'm performing good, but if I were to learn more about this, and this, I would perform even better. And I know that you're great at it. I've seen it. So can you give me some insights? And not asking for too much. Like maybe at the start, you can start to think about it as a long-term process. Like if your chef or superiors are super reserved and closed, maybe just getting like one sentence or one tip, like, oh, you're just supposed to do it that way, or if you flip it around, you can do it that, and then say thank you, and maybe after a while, maybe after a week, you can say to them, oh, I tried that thing and it has worked great and it has given me more. Do you have any tips about this? So making them feel better as well. So it's not just you who's demanding stuff, but ideally in a manager situation, they would want you to say what you're struggling at. Otherwise, it's like, imagine having a goalie or something like that who sucks at saving things to the left, or sucks at maybe something something else, is bad as jumping or something weird, like have problems with their left feet, so everything that's on the left is super difficult, and him not telling the manager it, so they can't work on it, they can't send him to a physio to fix it, or they can't like give him the cues to do it right, and then he just performs like shit for the entire season, or maybe for 10 games before they figure it out. That would be super bad. But it feels like in the restaurant industry, you're just supposed to know things from the get-go, and if you ask, you kind of get demeaned, or you're called a bad chef and get punished, when it should be totally the opposite.
Yeah, I think it's people necessarily aren't to blame as individuals, and we're talking about chefs, front of house, back of house, general managers, management, even getting feedback from their direct management as well. It's important across the entire industry and the entire chain. But I think what we do have to acknowledge is that historically it has been a very stressful environment, and these sort of pleasantries in terms of things that we believe should be standard and are beneficial, proven to be beneficial in the occupational world, tend to come as a bit of an afterthought, because of it's one, what you've learned. It's how you've learned from the people before you and your previous leaders, and also it's difficult to be able to regulate that sort of positive reinforcement when you've just done 80 hours and you've not seen your family, and
Yeah,
you've had a bad review come through, whether you're front of house or back of house. And I think it's a chicken and egg scenario. But in order for us to start to change the cultures, in order for us to improve our retention and to make it easier to hire people, we want our teams to be doing the hiring for us, and to say, do you know what? I have never worked in a business where I feel valued and part of something, and productive as I do here. You should come and work with us, because it's not all about reducing hours. People can work 50, 60 hours a week healthily, providing they have the right structures in place for themselves in terms of self-care and well-being, that their environment is psychologically safe, that we've spoken about, that they feel valued, that they feel in control, that they know what they're working towards. It's not all about reducing hours. Like, we hear a lot about people putting on 4-3 working weeks now, so 4 days on, 3 days off. Sounds great. It is in principle if you're doing less hours in those 4 days, if you're doing 35, 40 hours. But if you're still doing 60 hours and you've still got a culture whereby your view isn't heard, and you still don't really know what you're doing within the organisation and where you fit, it's not going to solve the problem. You're still going to get a high turnover rate, and it's an important thing that people need to be mindful of.
Yeah, and that's just the case of, like, you're not improving anything, you're just making, like, removing hours. The situation can be just as stressful. So I think there you would be going at it from the wrong end. And I mean, probably if it were from a case of sustainability, like, okay, we're not going to change anything, but we're just going to do 1 day less. I think that if you were to have a more sustainable situation, like you talked about with your swimming, if you could just keep a better pace and a better performance, so you can do it for more days, you would probably get more done than for just doing the same amount of shit for 4 days instead of doing less but getting more across on 5 days. I mean, for seating, especially with COVID right now, you have limited seating because of the situation. So if you were able to work 5 days, you could get more more bookings and get more money. So if you were to think about it in a sustainability kind of way, and making sure you have the structures to to make the work psychologically sound and making sure all of the factors in the performance models are ticked off, like sleep, nutrition. What are we doing to facilitate those? Like as a chef, asking myself, okay, am I valuing sleep, nutrition, etc.? And as a manager, am I facilitating my chefs having proper sleep, having proper nutrition, etc., etc., so we can do it sustainably? And I think also, just to get back to the last point, when you think yourself, I'm struggling with this, I think it's very important to look around. Like maybe I'm a junior chef de partie, and I'm struggling with this. Well, have I asked if my commies are struggling with anything? Do I have people under me that are struggling with anything? Have I asked them? So not only thinking about yourself, but I usually do this when I think I want something, like I want people to maybe communicate more with me, or I feel like they're not paying more attention. I try to pay more attention to them and think, wait, am I doing what I'm supposed to do? Am I being so good that I think I am? Am I doing what I'm expecting from other people? And if the answer is no, then I have something to do as well. So being that sort of first person to do it and not just expecting other people to do it. I mean, you can't just go around and asking for advice and not giving it to other people. And in a team perspective, if you want the team to be good, that means that you're responsible for making the people that you have control over to be good as well.
I think that is fantastic advice and a good point to end on, really, Joar. I mean, were there any final thoughts from the back of this podcast that you wanted to share with the listeners? Obviously, we're going to share your survey, which I would encourage all of you there just to take a couple of minutes to go and fill out, because the data, I'm hoping the data will be shared with us as well, and we can publish that.
Yeah, of course. The study will hopefully be open access, so everybody will get, to read the full study once it's published.
Amazing. And if people wanted to find you, Joar, where could they find you?
Yeah, they can find me at ascensionofcl.com, so Ascension Official. That's my website, so I think that's probably the best space. I also have Instagram, so Joar _Svensson, JOAR _Svensson, a Swedish name. And then I also have LinkedIn, just Joar Svensson, if you want to reach out there. I know a lot of chefs have LinkedIn, so.
Yeah, it's do you know what? It's a platform that I've started using a lot more. It's incredibly useful. I've had it for years and never really taken advantage of it. But it's a great tool. Like, we've managed to connect with loads of catering colleges on there, and we're providing a lot of resources and training to them. But yeah, it's a never-ending worldwide network of people, which I guess is probably their branding. And exactly what they set out to do in the first place, but it does that. Yeah. So,
I think the most important thing of this is for managers probably, and people that are in control, to take a think and really think about, what do I want my restaurant to accomplish? Like, I wanted to accomplish, say, 2 Michelin stars. Okay, what do I need for that? I need a good team. Okay, what can I do that's in my control to make my team as good as possible? Because you're not a restaurant, you're a team. And I think a lot of people get lost in that process and they think we're just a restaurant and the people in the restaurant don't matter. Well, actually, it's the other way around. The people in the restaurant matter. I think it's just gotten turned around with the turnover rate. The turnover rate is so high, so there's no way to just think about the restaurant as members, because members come and go. But if you were to take it seriously and be like, okay, I'm going to find 12 chefs that have great potential and I can work to make them the best chefs possible, and together we're going to make this restaurant a place that nobody's ever seen before. I think having that standpoint, instead of, okay, I'm going to have a great restaurant and I'm going to have people come and go, but I'm going to make it great. I think that's working at it from the wrong end. Make sure that you're hiring the people who has potential, not only the best chefs, but people that can fit into a team. It doesn't matter if a chef is super good if they can't fit into a team. It's totally pointless. So going for potential, seeing how well people can perform, and making the commitment to make it long term. Of course, things can happen, people will come and go, but treating them like they're going to be a valued member or can become a valued member in a couple of years' time, and be it for a long while. I mean, why can't the chef work at one restaurant for 10 years or an entire team for 10 years? Why is that never seen? Maybe some restaurants have it, but that would be great. Imagine the performance when everybody knows each other, and maybe one new person comes a year, which you train up and have the process. Everybody knows how you run things, and everybody knows like the skills. Everybody's know each other, so the communication and everything is great. And we also have the structure in place for sleep. We have snacks in service. I think that's key for nutrition. If you're having a 16-hour work shift and you have no breaks for food except for lunch and dinner, I think you're crazy. I mean, just having a snack like a power bar or something for energy is so key. So thinking of those things, making sure that your chef's getting the sleep they want or the sleep they need, and making sure that if someone has a problem here, that's taken care of. Okay, you have a problem with your wrist. Okay, we have a physio that we work with. We can't pay the entire fee, but we have like a collaboration, so you get 50% off. Oh, I'm having a hard time with pressure performance. Okay, we have a sports psychology consultant over here that you can talk to, who's retained or have a collaboration with, and etc. etc. So we have these processes and these structures in line to make sure that the team becomes as great as possible, and really having the balls to invest in a team instead of just, oh, people will come and go. Having the balls to invest and say, these 10 people or these 20 people, at least 18 of them are going to stick around for 1 year or 2 years, and I'm going to invest in them and make sure that they're the best they can. Because I think a lot of it stems from the turnover rates, being afraid that, oh, that chef is going to leave and that chef is going to leave, so I'm not going to invest in them. But if you don't invest anything in them, why would they stay? I mean, that's, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like having a car and never having it serviced or changing the tires. And
yeah, it's going to break anyway.
it's going to break down, and then you'll be stranded, and that will increase your stress levels, and it will leave you in the middle of nowhere, no matter what country you're in. That isn't a good thing. So, and I'm not saying that people who like cars are much more valuable than that, but
yeah,
you have to invest in order to pay dividends. But
and as we talked about with the retention or the cost of rehiring, if we say that the amount is the low amount in studies, so £3,000, if you're not at least spending that to make sure that one person is going to stay, then what are you doing? Because it's going to cost more to rehire than it would to pay that to make sure they are. So try to think of it in those terms. Like, it's not, people think of things in terms sometimes as black and white. Like, if I'm paying this money, I'm losing money. And if I weren't to pay that money, I wouldn't have lost any money and they could have left, instead of, okay, if I don't pay this money, the risk of them leaving is going to increase, which makes the rehiring fee even more of a reality. It makes their performance worse, and it also makes sure that they're not going to learn as good as they could. So I think when you try to think of things in that way, that there are sacrifices that need to be made and are going to be made either way that you do things, then I think it's easier to make the decisions to hire people and put more energy into people and invest more into
thank
people.
you very much. I think they're all very, very valuable points, and there's a lot of takeaway, and this is probably going to take a couple of listens. So if you stuck with us to the end, it's well worth saving this, letting other people know. We will be doing regular podcast episodes again every single month at least, providing time commitments allow. But I think it's important that we continue these conversations because they are great. And Joar, thank you very, very much for your time today, sir.
Yeah. As a last thing, I would just like to say that for any Michelin restaurant that is interested in what we're talking about, if you get me and my wife one free dinner, I can give you a workshop free of charge.
Pimping yourself out there.
Yeah, I want to experience the culinary world more, so I think it's a worthwhile trade.
No worries at all. So thank you very much. I'll speak to you soon. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Thanks again for listening to another episode of the Burnt Chef Journal. If you haven't yet checked out the Burnt Chef Project website, then please head over to www.theburntchefproject.com. You'll find a whole host of resources, free access to our training app, as well as free support services, blog posts, our merchandise store, and also our ambassadors who are there to support you when you need it. Thanks again for joining us this week, and I'll see you again soon.